Let the good times roll. Les bon temps rouler. That's right. It is Carnival season. So we're going to talk about where Carnival comes from, its history, and how it's celebrated today in different parts of the world. Carnival has a very, very long history. In fact, thousands and thousands of years of pagan festivals in the origins of the Bacchanalian festivals dedicated to the god of wine, Dionysus. Let me just stop here and remind you that this is Latina Literati. If you enjoy interesting places, books, people, past and present, then this is the channel for you. Les bon temps rouler. Let the good times roll, as they say in New Orleans. Carnaval, from the Latin carne leverum, which means take away the meat. And that's exactly what the church would do eventually. But first, before the church, for thousands of years, there were parties dedicated to Dionysus, to Saturn, the Saturnalia, Lupercalia. These festivals began in October and went all the way to the spring solstice. That's a lot of partying. That's partying for most of the year. And of course, once the church comes into being, all of that is squashed. And what is allowed is a party before the 40 days of Lent, where no meat is allowed. Therefore, the name Carnaval. In other words, take away the meat. And so you have 40 days where you traditionally don't have meat and are preparing for the Easter celebrations. Traditionally, what this meant was that people from all different social classes would don masks and they could party and enjoy each other's company without the strictures of the very strict social classes. So when you have a really strict social structure, you need these outlets because people get frustrated. And what would happen is people would dress up, be masked, and enjoy lots and lots of wine and beer and all sorts of festivities. And so traditionally, you see some of the best known carnivals in places like Venice and in places like Rio and in places even as close as Veracruz. The state of Veracruz in Mexico has a wonderful, wonderful carnival. And because music is such a central part of the carnival in Veracruz, they invite bands from all over. And so wonderful Caribbean bands arrive. And at the end of the week of Carnival, they bury Juan Carnaval. So it's kind of a symbolic burying of the party before Lent. And so now you'll hear in Louisiana, for example, they call it Mardi Gras instead of Carnival. Mardi Gras is French for Fat Tuesday. And so that's just a different way of saying the days that lead up to Ash Wednesday, when Lent begins and when the party stops. At least for 40 days. So Mardi Gras is just the last day of Carnival. And if you've ever seen the crews and the different groups out of New Orleans, it's just over the top, fabulous affair with all sorts of different competitions for costumes and for parties being given at different venues and with different themes. Some of them come from the traditions in Europe and some come from the traditions in Africa and some come even from the traditions of the native peoples, because there are groups that call themselves Indians that dress in kind of very large feathers and take their inspiration from the Native American tribes as well. So it's a mixture, but it's a big party in New Orleans. And so I thought it'd be interesting to kind of take a look at Rio in Brazil, Veracruz in Mexico, and then also Venice as maybe the best known carnival in Italy. Of course, February in Italy is freezing. So the Carnival in Venice is very much about head-to-toe costumes. And you can see here some of the amazing costumes from Venice. And it's pretty interesting to note that the Carnival of Venice is not resurrected until 1979 because Napoleon in 1798 invades Venice and forbids any party, including the Carnival. I don't know why he'd do that, but he did. And so for 200 years, there is no Carnival in Venice, which is wild because it's considered kind of the iconic Carnival in Europe. But it only is resurrected in 1979, and they go back to try and find what traditions are or what they were and reincorporate them into the costume making and to the parties and into the different events that are that take place in the Venice Carnival. The southern hemisphere, it's quite warm all year round, and so it's all about taking your clothes off. So there's a lot of feathers and a lot less clothing in Rio. And I would say that in Mexico, you're in the middle. So you're not as naked as as Brazil, but definitely not as clothed as you would be in Venice. We all need a time to release, to enjoy, to have fun. And Carnival was a way to channel that need and to have all the social classes mix and party together without any of the social stigma. Old ideas, old times, the new ideas are just to have fun and to really find a way of enjoying these special parties all over the globe. And now on to my favorite part of the video, the book recommendations. Thought I would share 3 books. 2 are from Brazilian authors, and 1 is an American author, and it takes place in Venice. So the first is Amado's Doña Flor and her 2 husbands. You may have seen the movie, but the book is always better. And as always, check your library, your local bookseller, or we'll link them below in the description box for you to purchase from independent booksellers. So Doña Flor and her 2 husbands is basically about a 2-timing, no-good partying guy who keels over in Carnival. And then what does his wife do? Well, you'll have to read the book to find out. But it's a good book, and it's a Brazilian interpretation of some magical realism as well as a good love story. So recommend that book. The second book is called The Seamstress, a novel. And these are 2 sisters. Takes place in the countryside in Brazil. And so these 2 sisters will have 2 very different lives, and they will help each other throughout their journey. Really interesting because the backdrop is the history of Brazil. And so you have a dictatorship, and you have people in the countryside that are rising up against the dictatorship, and you have different parts of society taking different parts in this conflict, and the sisters are on opposite sides. So really interesting book, and I highly recommend it, The Seamstress, a novel. The third book is by the author who wrote Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, and the book is called The City of Fallen Angels. And so he arrives in Venice a few days after the opera house La Fenice is burned down. And it's a mystery as to how the fire came about. So he starts to speak to people and investigate and talk about what Venice is like and what are the different forces at hand, what could have happened to this iconic opera house, what are their traditions, and including Carnival, and what are the things that are happening to Venice as a city. So it's a fascinating book. You'll really enjoy it. The City of Falling Angels. So again, fabulous book, just a wealth of detail if you're interested in Venetian life and Venice as a city, as well as some of its traditions. So I hope you've enjoyed a little tidbit of history about the Carnival and these book recommendations. This really is a joint journey. I would love to hear from you what you'd like us to talk about. And I hope you have a very, very happy Mardi Gras, Carnavale, that it be filled with joy. As always, we wish you mucha salud, mucho amor y mucho cariño. Gracias.